budget session. So we've had 2 days of budget deliberations, and I think we've had a number of fruitful questions. And appreciate staff's efforts on being very informative. We have everyone here except for Councillor Dillon, who will be here shortly. I just had some car hiccups, but we'll be here shortly. So we're going to proceed to the questions. Any additional questions from members? Councillor Pleshy? In case you didn't get a chance the other night.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Alex, I received an email from that delegate that was on biofuel, and he made a request to have another discussion during the budget on the upcoming tender and implementing B20, the B20 component in their fuel. We don't have to do that now, do we? It's not something that at budget we would need to start those discussions. The tender, I think the contract ends next year.
No, through the chair, no. I know that the delegate did reach out to us already at Transit and asked for a meeting, which we'd be more than happy to meet with any vendor. But no, not through the budget. We have a contract now in place, and we'll be going through the proper process with our procurement folks.
Okay, and we'll be looking into that, into our current, the current agreement, and extending, possibly looking at, again, the municipalities in the province going together or breaking away and doing something separate. We'll be looking into that in the next months to come.
And through the chair, absolutely. So based on the TTC bringing on the University of Toronto to help with the study on biodiesel and its impacts on transit vehicles, we have been working with TTC. Once that report is finalized, I understand it's almost finalized, then Brampton will definitely be making and pursuing how much biodiesel we will use at what points, at what season. Okay. So clearly we have a big interest in using biodiesel. We currently use 4%, as I mentioned, due to Ontario regulation. And we hope to go through to about 20%, which is the maximum we can use based on the engine manufacturer warranty through the summer months. And then scale back again in winter because of the clogging of the filters that it causes. So clearly we'll definitely be pursuing that and engaging all the vendors that are interested in bidding on that.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Joe, when are we going to get the information on those IT system software upgrades for this budget?
Through the chair, my understanding is that was to be presented at the April workshop.
Okay, I was looking for that information before the end of budget.
So, sorry, through the chair, you want specifically which systems were being updated?
Those 7, was it 7?
That's correct.
Yeah, systems and kind of just a brief of what they do.
That, we can provide that for Wednesday if you wish.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any additional questions, Councillor Pleshy? No. Councillor Fertini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. Do we put motions forward now, today, for any additions that we want, or are we going to wait till Wednesday for that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe it should be properly introduced today, just so staff can deal with it, make sure it's incorporated in the budget, and if necessary, provide any further information that's required for Wednesday's special council meeting.
Okay, thank you. So I think this goes to Al's department. So we have the seniors, you know, we're still giving free facilities from Monday to Friday. Am I correct? It's still in the budget. Everything stays the same. But I wanted to add, like Gore Meadows, they have that problem with the kitchen and any facility. If it's anything in that room, it should be part of that facility. We shouldn't be charging extra if something's not being used by a different department or there's a wall dividing it. So if the kitchen's in a room over here and just, you know, I don't see why we have to charge them extra to make coffee. So I wanted to add that part on it. And I wanted to add also an extra 3 days, because a lot of these people have events and they have to pay maybe 3 days or 2 days out of the year on a night event on it. They're requesting. So a lot of them have to go to schools and pay all this money. So maybe if we're not booked, we could give them the room two nights out of the year. So, if we can do it.
So we'll look to the city clerk on how that would be worded, and then maybe we can get Al's feedback based on that.
Sure, if I, through the chair, the first point, I believe, Councillor, you were asking whether or not, as part of a rental for a seniors group, when they're renting a room, if it's adjacent to a kitchenette, would we be able to include the kitchenette as part of the rental agreement? And I think council has already decided, and we've made that change. So
Sorry?
now when there's, I think council's already made that change. When there's an affiliate seniors group who's renting a room, if there's an adjacent kitchen to it, we've now revised it so that the seniors group would be able to use the kitchenette as part of the rental without any additional charges. So I think that's already been done. I think council did that about a month ago or 6 weeks ago, something along that line. So that's done already. In regards to your second point, I just need to understand it a little bit better. Were you suggesting that if,
I'll give you an example, the Talmud community, they do an event twice a year, and they have to use a school or even Gord Meadows, let's say, the rent is so expensive, and now they're not even getting grants. So if maybe we could help them out, like, if we're not booked, the hall is empty anyway, why not, can we give them 2 nights out of the year for any event, if they have a birthday party, anniversary, whatever event they want to do.
So this would be for a recognized seniors association.
Yeah, only affiliated, and the kitchen part was only for Gore Meadows, where we were getting the complaint that they couldn't even use it to plug and make coffee or tea. For a lot of the seniors, that was it.
so through the chair, just wonder, maybe we could take this offline and just get a little more clarification in terms of exactly what you're looking for. We can certainly look at, to review sort of our utilization and our affiliation policy, but I'm not quite sure exactly what you're looking for. I just need to better understand your request, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Councillor Pelletier on that point?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think just to help, or at least try and help with the affiliated seniors and the rate that's associated with those seniors for our facilities. And I know we discussed making those changes with the kitchenette or whatever, but we also discussed, we talked to our seniors that rent rooms at Casa Campbell, that they just ensure that they're tidying up after themselves. They're cleaning up their whatever's left as much as they can do. Less maintenance for us to go into it is less cost to the taxpayers. So I think they understand that, and I think that's good moving forward. As for the extra day, I might not be 100% sure with respect to Councillor Fortini, but again, with those affiliated seniors, I guess they're looking for more than 1 day for a possible event, and I guess if we can work with them to see if we can provide that extra day, but it's only $1, 1 day and then a day after, but it's only $1 anyways for the affiliated seniors. So I guess if we can work with them to try and find which days work together the best in the year. I think that's the way I understand it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Is Councillor Fortini?
I meant, so a lot of these seniors, they have, like, let's say, Christmas party at night, they have to pay rent for the hall. So they're asking, can you give us 2 days out of the year, in the evenings or weekends free? Only if it's not booked. If we're booked an event already for someone else, we cannot cancel it. If it's available and they want that date and it's not there, we could give it to them. But, and again, like Councillor Pelletier said, they have to clean up and do everything themselves. We don't need, and it's usually the evenings by 11 o'clock we close the facility, so they're gone by 10:30 anyway. So from 7 to 10:30 or in an afternoon, whatever they want. That's all.
So through the chair, we can certainly look at that.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, Councillor Willens.
Yeah, just quickly through you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if this is for Alex or for Bruce. On the Green Fleet strategy, it's got 150,000 there. Would that be for testing new vehicles? Would that be for a program, or would that? It doesn't seem like very much, because I think you could use up that 150,000 with one vehicle.
Just to get rid of it.
Doesn't matter.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I think that's for me, and that would be the amount for looking at really the effectiveness of how we're using our fleet and whether there are opportunities. Have we got the right size, the right vehicles and that? And so it was really that review.
So that would also look at the hydrogen cells or biodiesel or things like
It
that?
would look at what types of vehicles and the
Okay.
energy source for
Oh,
them.
that's a reasonable number then. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Question for Community Services. South Fletchers. I was there on the weekend for the Weekend of Champions, and I know that second floor has been vacant for a period of time. How much do we have allocated in this year's budget for the retrofit that was planned?
Through the chair, so there's nothing in this year's budget. It's already approved last year, so it's gone. The tender's been out. Work is scheduled to commence in the coming weeks, and scheduled to be completed later on this year. So there was some delay. We initially, for context for council, the initial plan when the restaurant that was there previously went out of business, the plan was to put it on MLS, and we attempted to get new tenants there. There wasn't really much interest. We then took a step back. We looked at the actual requirements for the community. It was decided that the best return on investment would be to put community rooms up there, upstairs. That's being retrofitted now. It's going to have the ability to have some additional training ability as well. The flooring is being structured so that the rental groups would also be able to use it as a sports training room as well. And there would be community groups for both the seniors and the community at large to use. So that work is going to commence in the coming weeks.
Coming weeks, okay. Are there any additional questions or motions? Okay, Councilor Vicente.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question for transit. There have been some concerns raised online with regards to our investments in transit. And when I look here at the highlights for the transit division, it shows that we're hiring 92 new positions in 2019, further 81 next year, and further 78 projected the year after that. And I would just like, just for reassurance of the public, if transit could comment on, is this council making further investments in transit this year and projected for the future years, or are we actually falling behind?
And through the chair, clearly this council, with the proposed budget, is looking at making substantial investment in transit with the service hours that we're looking at putting in for 2019.
Steeply upward. Our investments in fleets are not keeping at that same pace. In your opinion, would you say that what we're investing to expand our fleet and the capabilities is appropriate and commensurate with the ridership increases over the past few years?
And through the chair, clearly for the fleet size, excuse me, several years ago, approximately 2, 3, or 4 years ago, there has been a conscious decision to scale back a bit given the ridership trends in the GTHA, given the aggressive plan that Brampton had. However, in the last couple of years, including the budget coming forward through the capital program, has been an increase in the fleet. Keep in mind, though, although we'd love to be able to implement more vehicles on the road, our vehicle lead time for our conventional buses is approximately 1 year to 1.5 years, and our Zoom hybrid vehicles are about 2 years. So we've already got in our capital program increases in our fleet size. However, we won't realize those fleet increases until a year or 1.5 years. But what we are doing is we've come up with some creative ways of deflecting some of our assets with what they call taxi vehicles. I don't want to get too much into details because I'm a transit guy, I will bore you. But clearly, when we do that, we're able to get more service hours on the road and effectively using our fleet and maximizing their hours on the road. So with the 88,000 service hours, it's a huge, huge increase, like I mentioned before. In future years do show an increase in the fleet size more than what the business plan was.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Al, I just want to follow up briefly on the South Fletchers. What will those community rooms look like? Do we have any idea the size of them, how many there will be on that entire second floor? Because we do have someone who is interested in utilizing some of that space, and I'm just wondering if the configuration of the new rooms is going to fit with what this person had in mind, so that we would have a full-time rental up there, possibly in one of the rooms.
Through the chair, so I believe there will be, I want to say 4 or 5 rooms up there. The intent is that they would be able to be booked by members of the public. Seniors would be able to use them. And in a room or two, we actually are designing the room to have the flexible flooring that will allow for training. So I think the group that you're talking about is a group that's interested in providing some additional off-ice training for some of the hockey players. And my understanding is that the configuration of the room and the setup of the room will be able to accommodate that rental.
Okay, are any of the rooms going to be flexible in terms of adjusting the size, like opening up a wall and creating a much bigger room?
Through the chair, that I don't know, but I can certainly get our staff to review it, and I'll give you the information in a little bit.
Okay, that would be of interest, because these people have been asking us for a number of years now about that. So I just want to make sure that if we're doing this, we do it in a way that they can utilize it if they want to have a full year rental of it, that we can do it that way.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Fortin, did you want to ask that question?
Question on Riverstone. We went for a little tour there on Friday. It's almost 80% done. I know they're dividing some. There's that empty parking lot across the street. So it's not being used. Can we look at it, maybe put some tennis courts or something for that community? Because a lot of tennis people have been asking, even when we were at Williams there, about it, at Town Hall.
So
And
through
maybe
the,
since they're already there, the developer, maybe just let them continue and see what the cost is to do it.
so through the chair, we've had this discussion previously. So the environmental assessment that's come in, that part of the soil is clean. There's no issues with that. We have looked at our Parks and Rec master plan. We've confirmed that there has been identified a need for additional tennis courts throughout the city. So we are working in, likely next year, there'll be a budget submission at this time next year to transform part of that accessible parking lot into a 2 or 4 court tennis court for the residents in the area.
Maybe 2 tennis, and because it's a big parking lot. Or maybe two tennis, because lighting's all there, the lights, maybe change the lighting, and maybe do something with ball hockey or something, make 2 different things, because you're gonna put 4, you could get 6 tennis courts in that parking lot,
Yeah.
how big it is.
So through the chair, so that's, well, staff are looking at that now. They'll be presenting some options for consideration, and then we'll be bringing it back with the future budget.
Okay, are there any other questions or motions? Having said that, then I have a motion that I'll put forward, seconded by Councillor Medeiros, and if we can get the city clerk to put it on everyone's screen, and I will speak to it. Give everyone a moment to read it. And this is after discussions with the city treasurer and the CEO, looking at ways we have new budget pressures with some of our efforts and motions that have passed so far that need to be accounted for. At the same time, the good news we received from the federal government in terms of the federal gas tax funds. Also the fact that the Riverstone Community Center, which we originally had anticipated would be operational in January, at best it's looking like it'll be August, and so those funds that were budgeted for that community center are no longer required. And I'll have the CEO speak to the compression unit and why that's not necessarily a cost pressure. But these motions here would enable us to achieve our goal of having a 0% tax bill on the municipal portion. And before I ask the CEO to speak to the compression unit, the compression impacts, I just want to say I think this is particularly important on two fronts. One, obviously, we talk a lot about the weight that property tax has on families, on seniors, on fixed incomes, but there's also a real economic development component here. We're making a pitch to investors. They look at the bottom line. They compare us to Mississauga, compare us to Vaughan, and because adjacent municipalities have tax increases this year, it enables us to do a little bit of catch-up where we can become competitive again on taxation. And so given that this council has put a large emphasis on jobs, economic development, bringing investment to Brampton, I believe the strategic position that we're taking in this budget will be very important for that pitch that we all want to make to bring more industry and investment to our community. And so with the motion on the floor, I welcome discussion and questions, but to give a little bit of understanding on the logic, I thought it would be helpful to get the CEO to explain a few of the elements here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With the two key components, I'll start and I'll gladly ask the Treasurer to weigh in as well. With respect to compression, with the change in legislation with the minimum wage going to $14 an hour, and when you look at the skills and ability of our staff within the corporation, it actually resulted in people getting paid at almost the same level that we had direct reports. So we needed to then make adjustments to those individuals who had those direct reports, and so that they weren't getting paid the same as the people that they were overseeing. Hence, so we needed to start to create some cushion and reduce that compression issue. And in some cases, the subordinates were getting paid more than those that were doing the supervision. Hence, we've, instead of taking the hit all in 1 year, we're just spreading it out over 2 years, 2019 and 2020. And Riverstone, as you articulated, Chair, given the delay in opening the new community center, we can offset all those costs. They don't necessarily need to be all in 2019. So we're trying to reflect it in terms of when it would actually open, take on those operating costs, and then the balance of those in 2020.
Okay. Let's start the discussion. Councillor Fertini.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's great. It's a zero increase. Can we add maybe a friendly amendment? We got our Brampton Watch. So maybe if we could look into putting something into our Brampton Watch for a fund, put park it aside for now. The neighborhood watch, the Brampton Watch or neighborhood watch that we're getting all involved, and we do have a committee. Maybe if we put some money aside, and when this committee gets formed, we have it. Because it will be done in maybe, I think, a couple of months. Maybe.
Through the chair, if I could maybe just confirm, are you looking at one-time funding, or are you looking for ongoing funding commitments?
Well, for this year, I think we should look at it this year, and then if we have to carry it on, we'll carry it on.
Through the chair, so it may be something you may want to consider over the coming months and working with staff, and then we'll be back here shortly for the 2020 budget. We are coming back for December of this year for the 2020 budget, but maybe we could work with council over the coming months to determine what that programming looks like, and then propose that. The alternative to that, if it's one-time funding, we could set up a project and fund that on temporary basis out of the general rate stabilization reserve. But it may be more prudent to determine exactly what we require in terms of programming before we put a number to it.
So if we, so long as we have it for this year, starting this year, then we can look into the budget for the following year, so long as we have a reserve fund. That's all I'm asking. Else-
Yeah, through the chair, I mean, council can come back at any point during the year to do a budget amendment if we just want to set aside one-time funding. So again, if we firm up that number as to what we require, we could do a one-time funding from general rate stabilization. It doesn't have to be done today or Wednesday. It could be done a month from now, 2 months from now, once we determine more what that programming might look like. If that's council's wish, if they want to do something today, we could also put some money aside, but I don't know if that's enough, for the program.
If I can make a suggestion, Councillor Fertini, is I know we all want to do more on the enhancement of public safety, and a number of councillors have come up with different ideas. Rather than being specific, if there was a public safety initiatives fund, we could get input from community groups and from the Safe City community, and then make a decision afterwards, once we've done some research and due diligence, and look at what potential partnerships and ideas are out there. And so if we are prudent in putting some funds aside for the purpose of public safety without having to be specific enough to specify any specific partnerships.
Okay.
Would that be reasonable?
Yeah, pretty good with that.
Through the chair, you may want to just include a direction to staff to work with council and the members of the community groups to, identify the programming and funding required.
Okay.
That's,
Okay, so I would take that as a friendly.
Thank you.
Councillor Medeiros.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess just first thing I'd want to just recognize your leadership, certainly not only during the campaign. You talked about bringing zero, and I would lie to you if I sometimes at times I would be a little bit skeptical, but really kudos to your leadership, kudos to the CAO, acting CAO and our treasurer, and certainly all staff. I think this sends a strong signal to our community. Mayor talked about economic development, but I also, I think what we heard loud and clear that they want us to do what we can here at City Hall, do more, unfortunately. At times we hear stories about money being wasted and so on. So certainly it's a signal that we are doing a lot of great initiatives, and we're doing more with less. And I think certainly this really sets a tone for the next couple of years. I think the only question I would have through the mayor to our acting CAO, skeptics may say, okay, we're going for zero. What's going to happen over the next couple of years? Is there going to be a sticker shock? Certainly I know through listening to the mayor and some of his comments that this is really the beginning of a long-term strategy of really about the city being more financially responsible and strong fiscal management. So if you maybe want to just comment on that.
And to Councillor Medeiros, just to before the CEO share some information, I just want to commend Council and Councillor Harkirat Singh for putting forward the motion on KPMG early on. As you'll see, it's in the back of our budget binder. We have some interim assessments, but the real fruit of that KPMG work in terms of the service delivery and value for money would have an impact on subsequent budgets. And a motion that I'd like to do after this one would relate to the fact that we would be removing the forecasted tax increases, as we know that those will not be the tax increases that the City Council would accept. We're not going to have on city, we shouldn't have on city communications or city website a tax forecast that we know hasn't been ratified or accepted by council. And so I think we're going to see the savings from the KPMG efforts, not necessarily in this year's budget, but in future budgets, because of the early work council took in December.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In response to Councillor Medeiros, as I noted last week, the leadership and staff within this corporation do take their fiduciary very seriously. and really appreciate the leadership and guidance provided to us from council. We do believe in working hard every day and making things become a reality in terms of doing more with less. And as our chair pointed out, we're really looking forward to the outcome of the KPMG work, which is coming to council in mid-May, and then doing much more detailed work over the balance of the year to actually identify further efficiencies and refinements so we can continue to do even more with less money. So we will continue on doing work for the city we're proud to work for, and there is always room for enhancements, and we're looking forward to every opportunity we can leverage.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question, Joe. With these, or Dave, either one, with these new items listed in the motion, what does that do to the end number that will eventually go into the rate stabilization fund or any of the other rate funds that we've got this year?
Through the chair, so what this would do is it's just a one-time draw from the general rate stabilization reserve of $110,000 for the one-time costs associated with the setup for the seniors fair pass. Outside of that, there's no further change to the budget.
Okay, so the actual number that this year will be put into our reserves is what?
Through the chair, as you know, the amount that goes into the general rate stabilization each year is determined by whether we have a surplus or not. If we're in a deficit position, we draw from the general rate stabilization reserve. If we're in a positive position, we would increase that amount to the general rate stabilization reserve, and then as per policy, any residual amount beyond our 10% target would go to the asset replacement fund.
Okay, but I'm just trying to get, do we know what that number is now? We're at 75.1 million now in the general rate stabilization fund. With this year's contribution, more or less I'm asking, what will this year's contribution be from our surplus?
Through the chair. So with the budget not effectively moving any amount, we're effectively at our 10% target today. So there wouldn't really be a foreseen reason to increase the contribution to the general rate stabilization reserve.
Okay, so the surplus we had was what, 23, roughly 23 million? And then was the 23 million after we already made those adjustments, the 1.7 for marketing fund? So we're essentially putting in 23 million, give or take?
Through the chair. So I believe we first made the top up to the general rate stabilization reserve. And then after that, we allocated $5 million towards those council-directed initiatives. Then any residual amount would go to the community investment fund for the repayment of the advance repayment of loans.
Okay, and we've reduced with this motion one of the advanced repayments of loans, correct?
Through the chair, no.
Oh, okay. I was looking at the, I guess, what number was it? The tax-based funding now available from the gas funds. That won't have any impact on it?
Through the chair, that was for the $100 million project for the community, the Center for Innovation and Connected Learning. So what we've done is we've applied the federal gas tax to the 3-year forecast as well as any other eligible projects that have already been approved that have not yet started.
Right.
And we will apply that funding. That will free up tax-based funding, which will then apply to the Community and Center for Innovation, which will then reduce our debt requirements.
Okay,
So
that's exactly.
now that's external debt. It's not the internal debt.
Okay, that's what I was
yeah.
looking for. So we're decreasing our debt by doing this. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Palashi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we get the amendment back up there? It's funny to see this because it's like we're going full circle. History is repeating ourselves. I remember seeing something very similar to this when city established the Brampton Community, or Brampton Safe City. This is kind of how that got kicked off. We talked about this when we established the Brampton Community Safety Advisory Committee, that eventually there would be some sort of funding that that committee could provide to organizations to increase public safety. I'm not seeing that community advisory committee, or the Brampton Safety Advisory Committee in with this amendment, and I think that they're the ones that should be taking the lead on this when this is the direction that committee was going when we first established it. So I don't want to see that staff be directed to establish the Public Safety Reserve Fund. I'd rather see that staff, in consultation with the Brampton Community Safety Advisory Committee, come back with recommendations to council on how to establish or what it looks like in terms of the Public Safety Reserve Fund. So can we adjust that amendment?
So let me ask Councillor Plushy, this would just be the fund. So if the Safe City Committee needed an initiative they would need a safety funding from, they would go to this. But there would be no, this reserve fund is simply funds set aside in the budget for the purpose of public safety. It wouldn't be given any direction.
So we've established a committee. What do we think with that committee doing the work? Who are we or staff to determine what that fund is going to be?
So it's not going to say what the fund is. It's simply setting aside funds for the purpose of public safety. But it would be up to, that would be a future decision in terms of what the funds could be utilized for.
And I understand that, and I think the funds should be utilized for, and we can have that discussion then. But who's putting the dollar figure in there? Who's going to say how much money should go into this fund? When the Brampton Community Safety Advisory Committee are the ones that are working with community groups and have a better understanding, possibly, than we do in terms of how much funding should be available, or how much funding should be set aside.
So part of the challenge is we don't have a request from because we haven't created the citizens on the Safe City Committee.
Yeah.
We don't have a request, and the budget's going to pass this week. And I think Councilor Bertini makes a fair point. I know Councilor Williams has made this point too. If there's not funds set aside in the budget for this purpose, are we missing out on some of the community-led safety initiatives that may come before us?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think even if it's a nominal amount of 300,000, if it was set aside, at least it gives us some funds that when we get to that point, that we can have an ability to have community-led public safety initiatives. I just stress, obviously, most public safety initiatives, 99% of them are run by the Peel Police, but there are some grassroots efforts that I think there's a lot of interest in the community on.
No, and you're right. There's more and more community groups that are coming together that run these safety programs. And I want for us, and I don't think we'd get anybody talking against the fact that we want to help support them. We don't want to be the ones running the programs, and that's what we always said. The dollar figure, we haven't
Determined to the city
Yeah,
treasurer,
through the
would it be
chair.
helpful to have a
Yeah,
dollar
we
figure?
would require a dollar figure to set up, whether it's a reserve fund or a project for this. I think earlier I was somewhat suggesting, I think similar to what Councilor Pelletier was mentioning, is that more the direction for staff to work with the public and these community groups to determine what the allocation would be. But if you want to set up something today through a motion, then I would suggest a dollar figure, and we could set that up as a project. We could fund that on a temporary, through the general rate stabilization reserve on a one-time basis.
Okay, so I think I might have an idea. As the former chair of the Brampton Community Safety Advisory Committee, I don't know who's the chair now, or Councillor Williams. I think maybe we can sit down and talk about with possibly the clerk and maybe Bill and some of the staff that attended the meetings. We can talk about, summarize all the discussions that we had during the last safety meetings and the number of initiatives that we kind of talked about and requests that we had, maybe to get a better understanding. And if we could have that discussion today or tomorrow, prior to Wednesday we finalize everything, right? Just to determine a rough idea of what that funding looks like.
So I think that's reasonable. With this motion, it brings it down to zero. So by keeping it consistent with the motion, it keeps this, once we set the direction of this motion, additional motions will change how this is reflected. And so what I'd suggest is if we can just put a placeholder number here for now, if it needs to be amended after the fact, then we can do so. Councillor Plushy, I was going to suggest, I've seen a few hands but maybe a placeholder amount of 300,000 in the interim, but we can adjust it if those involved believe prior to Wednesday that is inadequate.
Sure, yeah.
Through the chair, that would be fine. All I would recommend is if we could change this motion to, instead of a reserve fund, I would prefer if we could do it as a project, and then we would fund that amount from a transfer from the general rate stabilization reserve.
Okay. That's a friendly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Fertini.
That's fine.
Okay, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the mayor on his leadership. He did commit to 0%, and we're trying to do that. I want to thank staff for their hard work too on this, because it wouldn't be possible without some of these suggestions. And for the public safety project, I do support this because one of the things I hear door to door, even though Councilor Medeiros always kindly warns us about mandate creep and all that, but we do hear about crime at the doors, and there is clearly a gap somewhere, and we have to start addressing it somehow with community collaboration. So I appreciate your suggestion of working with various stakeholders, and I look forward to seeing what we accomplish through that fund that we public safety project amount we set aside. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Singh. Any additional comments before we take a vote on the motion? Seeing none.
Recorded vote.
Recorded vote. Requested by Councillor Medeiros.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, a recorded vote's been requested on this motion, which is amending the 2019 to 2021 current capital recommendations. All in favor of the motion as amended, please stand to be counted. Showing in favor is Councillor Santos, Councillor Desante, Councillor Willens, Councillor Paleshi, Councillor Bowman, Mayor Brown, Councillor Medeiros, Councillor Williams, Councillor Fortini, Councillor Singh, and Councillor Dillon. Mr. Mayor, that motion carries unanimously 11-0.
Okay. Now, a subsequent motion that I was looking to put forward, and maybe the city clerk can help us with wording. Part of our economic development pitch is going to be that this is the place that's tax competitive. I know we've always put placeholders in terms of tax increases, even if that's never actually going to be the tax increase. But that placeholder ends up on the city website, and those doing due diligence on investment projects will see that. And so I like the idea of having a 3-year budget planning cycle where we highlight projects that are going to be needed and the resources be required for, but it completely diminishes our ability. It takes some wind out of our efforts on economic development if we have those where they appear to the public that those are set in stone when they're not. And so can we have a motion just to say that there's no city communications that include a forecasted tax rate in the years ahead until it's been approved by council in the year of, just from a communications perspective.
For you, Mr. Mayor, it would probably be a motion, something that communications regarding the council approved 2019 current capital budgets focus on 2019 programs and funding only, and not include any forecasted tax rates for subsequent years until appropriately considered and approved by council.
Okay. And that would be seconded by Councillor Medeiros, and I appreciate everyone's indulgence on that. I know it's a small detail, but it is significant to our efforts we'll have on FDI as well and economic development. And I've spoken to the city treasurer, and this doesn't take away from any of the city treasurer's efforts for planning and resource allocation. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much through you, Mr. Mayor. I can support that. I don't have any issue with that. The only thing I want to just make sure about is does not forecasting any future increase or decrease have any impact on our credit ratings and things like that, where other people are looking at us to see how worthy we are of either taking out loans or investing?
Through the chair, it does not. We work with Standard & Poor's each year to work on our forecast, so the details are much behind the scenes. They're looking at our actual financial positions, and but again, from a planning perspective, we'll still have the information there for us. We've had this in budget committee, so we do have it available for staff to work with Standard & Poor's on that. What this motion is basically saying is that from a communications effort, we won't sort of signal those numbers until they're more firmed up.
Okay. No, I understand that, but I mean, if the numbers are there, we're already looking at them. There's nothing to stop any media release from saying the numbers are in the budget. I mean, we can't control that, but internally, you're talking about the way we will put the information out.
Through the chair, and any other communication externally that we make.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Paleski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dave, we seem to be, along the lines of what Councillor Bowman was talking about, we seem to be late in the budget cycle. And I recall in previous budget years, we've had kind of some accolades, some awards, comments in media that when we begin the budget process, we're doing our due diligence and bringing it forward prior to, and we seem to get kind of a lot of mentions when, and even ratings and awards in prior budget cycles. Is our budget being late in the year? And I realize that it was an election last year, and that's kind of where we are, why we are here today. Is that going to do anything with any of the many awards that, the emails that you send out saying, hey, we just got an award for this because of our budget? Is that affecting any of them?
Through the chair, so with respect to the C.D. Howe rating, it will likely have an impact, but it would impact every municipality in Ontario. Just because of the way the legislation works, municipalities in Ontario are not allowed to pass a budget in the year of an election. They can only pass it in the year following for that year. And there are points, if you want to call them that, assigned by C.D. Howe based on the timeliness of your budget approval. So for this year, all municipalities in Ontario will likely receive a reduced rating because of that, just the way the point structure works. But outside of that, we make every effort from staff's perspective to assess the point structures for those types of rating agencies and try to do our best to show the information as timely and as accurate and as transparent as possible. So we go through that each year. The criteria does change from time to time. So we try to make our best efforts on that front.
And so I realize, I know there was some smaller municipalities that went through their budget process in December, approving in January. But we've also talked about this in the past, trying to get C.D. Howe to recognize that legislation. Has there been any ongoing work with that, or any understanding by them to recognize the legislation that's handed down?
Through the chair, so I mean, they're trying to assess municipalities across the country, and legislation is different by province. So I think they're just trying to do their best to try to create as equal a process across the board. That could affect us in some ways here in Ontario. In other ways, it may affect other provinces as well from that criteria.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, all those in favor? Motion carries. Okay, from a procedural standpoint, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, through you, Chair. You know, I think I was just listening earlier at the many conversations around community safety, and there's been good, really important questions around what is the best way to have a community safety policy or group, whether it's in-house or done by the community. So, you know, I think just to add to that, I do want to move that staff help us find those answers. What is the best way to develop, promote, or even execute community safety policies in Brampton? And is that possible?
Yes, that would be done on Wednesday.
On Wednesday.
This is for, this would be budget allocations.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, yeah, that's good to know.
Good. Okay, from a procedural standpoint, I know there's a few motions the clerk will want us to adopt.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes. So this sounds like we're nearing the conclusion of the Budget Committee deliberations, so recommendations can be appropriately placed for special council meetings. So there's a number of motions which this committee has already deliberated on and passed, and they're highlighted in yellow. I'm going to go through them all. There are some motions which, some motions that we have to consider just to tie up the loose ends on the budget. And in particular, there are two members of council who have declared conflict, so there's some separate motions for which those members will need to excuse themselves. So with your indulgence, Mr. Mayor, I'll go through these. And the ones in yellow have already been considered. So approving the budget, receiving the presentation from the CAO and the treasurer. The next motion is the motion that approves the 2019 current and capital budgets. There is two exceptions. A, the compensation portion of Public Works and Engineering Department, and B, the compensation portion of Enforcement and Bylaw Services. So Part 1, A and B of this motion can be considered now by committee, and then Parts 2 and 3, those two councillors that declared a conflict can excuse themselves for that particular vote.
Okay, Part 1, we have a motion to that effect. Moved by Councillor Vicente, seconded by Councillor Santos. All those in favor? Motion carries.
So Councillor Willens declared a conflict with respect to compensation portion of Public Works. So Councillor Willens has left. Mr. Mayor, if you can take a vote on Part 2.
And we have a motion put forward for Part 2. Councillor Vicente and Councillor Paleshi, seconding. All those in favor? Motion carries.
Thank you. Councillor Willens can return, and Councillor Fortini will excuse himself as he declared a conflict on the compensation portion of Enforcement and Bylaw Services. So Part 3.
Part 3, a motion put this forward. Councillor Vicente, seconded by Councillor Bowman.
Councillor Willens isn't back.
No, it doesn't have to be.
And then you mark it off.
There's a short absence.
Seeing Councillor Willens. All those in favor? Motion carries.
Councillor Fortini can return. And then there are the balance of the motions 4 through 8, which are adopting the rest of the budgets and then the capital budgets in principle.
Okay, can we have a motion to put items 4 to 8 on? Councillor Medeiros and Councillor Fortini, seconding it. All those in favor? Motion carries.
The next motion is, I believe, was introduced, or perhaps not, by Councillor Fortini about amending the 2019 current budget for community services to allow city-affiliated seniors groups up to 2 free facility room rentals per year on evenings or weekends when the facility is not otherwise booked. Councillor Fortini, are you introducing that motion?
Okay, Councillor Medeiros has seconded. We have a discussion on this. Councillor Paleshi.
I thought that, I thought you guys were gonna go away and have a discussion on this. Because the way I read this is we're going to be charging seniors groups. Well, first, we're only allowing them for 2 free city, they're allowed to rent the room for $1 now.
Through the chair for clarification. So the current city-affiliated seniors groups are allowed to use the rooms during the day for no charge. I believe what the counselor was requesting was that in addition to the current affiliation policy, that when there's a seniors group that is going to be hosting an event, if they require a couple of extra days, or if they require some of those room rentals in the evenings or on a weekend, if those facilities and those rooms are available, the seniors would get up to 2 free days worth of rentals per year for free.
But if the rooms aren't being rented, why limit them to only 2? So say they use their 2, and if the room's not being rented,
So, through the chair, I mean, this was just walked on, so I didn't have a chance to sort of think this through, but the way I'm envisioning this is if this passes, seniors groups will then know that council has approved their ability to rent rooms at rec centers on weekends and evenings, which would have otherwise have been subject to our rental fee. They would now have up to 2 rentals a year for free on evenings and weekends, in addition to what they already have, which is during the day, Monday to Friday, to book rooms and use them. So I would suspect is these groups would start booking those rooms well in advance when they would be available, and then they would book those rooms for whatever their events that they would require.
don't you think, Al, that maybe we should have, to combat that, a certain amount of grace period to ensure that some of the groups that are booking those rooms and book, I think we have more, yearly turnovers of the ones that are booking the rooms for certain events, before we allow those rooms to go free to other groups?
Through the chair, in an ideal world, these are sort of motions that councilors speak to staff in advance so that we can sort of determine the consequences and the impacts. The fact that it's been walked on, if it's council's desire to make it so, we will make it so. There will have some budgetary impacts. There will have some consequences in regards to our ability to provide these rooms and the consequences that may have on our revenues. But it's council's decision.
I think before I commend Councillor Fortini and the initiative that he's putting forward here. I think there's some questions that need to be answered in terms of revenue sources and whatnot. So I think we need to, I'd rather a discussion, maybe at council or the mover and you, Al, to try and get to fully understanding this and some of the answers to some of those questions before council kind of puts this in motion. You good with that, Councillor Fortini? Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councillor Dillon.
Sorry, this was just walked on, right? Is that correct?
Sorry?
This is just walked on now?
Just walked on there.
I think this is I commend Councillor Fortini. It's I think this, obviously we've done the bus pass for the seniors, but I think we've had some good discussion on it beforehand. And so, I'd like to have some more discussion on this. There's certainly a need for seniors groups, but what they prefer is having a place to sit every day and during the winter months. And so perhaps we can even have a discussion with some of our school trustees and the PO Board of Education as to how we can accommodate them. I know Councillor Singh used to get them some rooms in the evening. And I know the Catholic School Board, Sean Xavier, who's of 7, 8, 9, 10, used to get some as well. I just, I'd like to say yes to it, but it's just some information that I still need. If they were to book it otherwise, what exactly are they paying for? Assuming they wanted to have a regular function on any given night. What's the actual cost?
Through the chair, I don't have the actual cost in front of me. It is posted on our website. It's our rental fees. The council
So
approves
do
on
they
an
pay
annual
for a
basis.
security guard? What are they paying for exactly?
Through the
Is it
chair.
just the actual fee for the room?
Correct. So through our user fee bylaw, there's rental rooms rates that are established by council on an annual basis. And so depending on the type of room, depending on the use, they would go through the user fee guide, they'd see the rate, and they would be charged that specific fee.
Like I said, I'd like to have more discussion on it. But I'll see what everybody else says.
So, hearing a few of the comments, I think we all want to do something to make it easier for seniors. I think Councillor Fertini makes a really good point that there are community groups out there. I know the Brampton Tamil Seniors Association, the example he uses, when they have their event in our recreation center, there's no one there. It's a time when it's not being utilized, and if there's a way that we can be helpful, I think that's a worthy endeavor. But what I'm hearing from Councillor Dillon is that this may require additional resources. Councillor Paleshi is saying, I don't think this actually, if it's being used, I think the clever part of Councillor Fertini's motion is that it would be used when the facility is not otherwise booked. So it wouldn't necessarily have a budget impact. So maybe this is a discussion we could add on Wednesday, and that way, if it doesn't have a budget impact, it may not be necessary to have this motion today. And so, Councillor Fertini, would you be open to moving this discussion to Wednesday?
I think it's very clear, Mr. If it's not booked, if the room is empty, I don't see why we can't do it. A lot of these seniors are going to school because they have to pay $700, $800 for that 3 hours at a school week. It's kind of, we get invited to these events, and they're always complaining, says we got facilities empty, but we cannot use them, but here we are paying a fee. So if it's empty, if it's not booked, I don't see why we cannot help them 2 nights out of the year to do an event. If it's booked, well, then, they cannot use it. So really, it's not, there's no impact. And this is where they're saying is, we gotta pay all these fees, so I'm willing to bring it to Wednesday for discussion, there's no issue, but this is what they're asking for, that's all.
Okay, I think that is a very fair request, but I think, is seeing that Councillor Fertini is okay with moving this discussion to Wednesday, is that the will of council? Is that, everyone's comfortable with that?
Referring it to the special budget committee meeting Wednesday?
No, just council.
Council on
Yeah.
the regular.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fertini. Okay, so all in favor of moving this to council? All in favor?
I want to speak to what's coming back from staff on Wednesday.
Just, we're having this discussion on Wednesday with this motion.
But we need information from staff, or we're going to be asking the same questions.
We'll bring a report back Wednesday.
Now he's asking for a report, so I'd like to understand.
You don't want to do that,
Okay, so my understanding of deferring the discussion on this to Wednesday is that if we need additional information, we can ask for it on Wednesday. We could ask for a staff report back on this if council members need more information. We're not asking for a staff report for Wednesday. Having said that, if any council members had queries they wanted to ask community services between now and Wednesday, they can. I was just saying that if we're using rooms that aren't otherwise being used, there's not necessarily a budget impact, and so it would be a more appropriate discussion on Wednesday at council.
So I can speak to that?
Yes.
No, not on Wednesday, now.
Okay, so we've we've referred this to Wednesday, can we still have the conversation?
Mayor, no. Committee has decided unless committee wants to stand down its motion and allow debate on the referral, but a vote was taken. That's my understanding, to refer this.
I put my hand up to speak to the referral. I was on the board.
So if it's the will of committee can stand down the motion and the vote to speak to the referral, but a proper referral motion was placed. The chair took the vote, and the vote carried.
Does the council want to continue this discussion? Okay, well, let's leave this to Wednesday. I don't think this is a budget matter, and if we need additional, if we need additional information, we can do so on Wednesday. Okay.
That motion has been referred. The motion on the page on Aaron Freeman delegation has been received. That was received last week. The following other motions were already considered by committee to receive and approve or approve in principle for future years, the BIA budget and the Brampton Library Board budget. And there was an additional item 6 with respect to the Brampton Library Board that city staff be requested to work with the library to investigate expanded after-hours programs at additional branches and facilities for consideration during the 2020 budget process. And that carried at committee on Wednesday. Following that, there was consideration of a report on Brampton Transit fare changes, and that report was adopted as per the staff recommendations. There was a further referral, which is shown in blue, from Committee of Council on March 20th to the Budget Committee. However, this referral is considered in the mayor's motion that was moved earlier in that 8-part motion. Then we have 5 pieces of correspondence that were submitted and received early in the Budget Committee deliberations. And finally, we have Mayor Brown's motion from this morning, which was introduced, amended, and adopted, and the further motion in terms of communications for the 2019 budget, which was introduced and adopted, and the final motion left for this committee, unless there's any other amendments, is to adjourn the meeting. Now, before we adjourn, Mr. Mayor, in accordance with the procedural rules adopted at the beginning of the meeting, there is an opportunity for council question period and an opportunity for public question period at the end of each session.
Okay, any additional council questions? Councilor Bowman.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Clerk, does this mean we will not be having our budget meeting tomorrow? Will that be moved to Wednesday?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if committee wraps up this morning, then its budget deliberations are complete, and the full set of recommendations will go to council Wednesday night, and there is no need for tomorrow's budget committee meeting.
Thank you.
I know council really enjoys spending time together, but we will have an opportunity on Wednesday. Councilor Medeiros.
Thank you, through the mayor. I think to communications or to Dave, talking about, because again, there's always, and we talked about the confusion between the municipal portion, and so the communication out is going to be very important to talk about, you know, the zero on one hand, and overall, because that's still going to create confusion. And I got that this weekend by several people who kept saying that, you know, we promised zero, we promised zero. Is it going to be zero? So I just think that we really have to outline and make that important.
And on that note, great point, Councilor Medeiros. We had asked before that we could have some updated information on what we're allowed to include on the tax bill. It's frustrating that we have our logo there on the letter, yet a portion of the bill is beyond our, 2 portions of the bill are beyond our control. And so do we have an update on our ability to adjust that letter to put the Peel logo and the education logo next to those components?
Through the chair, as you'll note, with one of the previous meetings, I did provide an update or distribution to council that included the regulation as to how to lay out the property tax bill. So there is no room to move in terms of updating the tax bill to accommodate the request that council was asking. However, I also attached to that the brochure that we distribute with each and every tax bill that goes out to to the public, to the residents. And we can work further on that to ensure that the messaging coincides with the proper messaging that we require with this budget.
So if we wanted to have an additional flyer in that bill that's mailed out, since you do the mailing once, that would be permissible?
Through the chair, that is admissible, and that is currently what we do right now.
Okay, good. And so maybe if I could ask that the communications on this, because it is a frustration for council where we get complaints about a component of the budget that's beyond our control, can that communication be shown to council prior to anything is sent out?
Through the chair, yes, we could send that out to you.
Okay, thank you. And maybe, so we can, the clerk can make note of that, so we can have an opportunity to have a discussion on that communication prior to it being sent out. And it can be added as an agenda item to a future council meeting. Councilor Fortini.
Thank you. To the clerk here, on that $300,000 on the funding for the Brampton, can we talk on that, or we passed it already?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's already been passed, and it's shown on your screen in red.
So we have to reopen it to talk, or we can't talk on it? I just wanted to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah, ask away.
Is that, okay. So in our last safety that we had established at the city, can we look into, because there was funding asked already by the chair last time, and I think we didn't get it, if I'm not mistaken. It was part of the discussion in the safety. Also, in that report also said the chair would take over that committee, and then the new committee would be done by residents. It was a motion passed. It was only, we were only gonna establish it, and then it was gonna be done through the residents, who was gonna take over. Now all of a sudden, we got 4 councils on there, if I'm not mistaken.
Through you,
So
Mr.
can you
Chair,
look into
yes, I don't recall the conversation. I'll have to go back and look at the meeting record from last term, but council has reestablished the Brampton Community Safety Advisory Committee, and it includes a composition of both members of council and citizens.
And there was some funding asked already, and I think we got denied, am I correct? So,
I'd have to go back through you, Mr. Chair, and check, I'm not sure.
okay, because I remember Council Fleschy, when we were asking for some funding at the time, we didn't get any.
Well, the good news on that front, we do have funding that's set aside with no purpose specified in terms of the composition of the committee. That can be discussed at council. Do we have any other additional motions? Just. If there's no other councilor questions, we'll begin the public question period. Yes.
Hello, my name is Sylvia. I'm a resident of Ward 3. Council talked about how, well, Mississauga is increasing its property tax, and so this gives us an opportunity to try to match it. Does council know why Mississauga is increasing its property tax? The mayor mentioned that Mississauga was increasing its property tax, so if we kept it down, it would keep more in pace. The reason why Mississauga has a property tax increase like this is because because council told staff.
So, Sylvia,
Yeah.
we're gonna keep it to questions. The reference was to other municipalities that have tax increases creates an opportunity for Brampton to play catch-up. It wasn't a specific reference to an individual municipality. And so you're welcome to ask questions of any decision taken today.
The long-term financial impact of this decision, like 10 years out. Mississauga did stuff like this multiple years, and now they're finding, oh, our infrastructure is falling apart, and now we have to do a 4.8% property tax increase. You're gonna find that staff can move numbers around, but you can only do this so long before you realize you just haven't put enough money, and there is only so much value for money you can find in a budget before roads start falling apart. Their state of good repair for roads is going down 30% over 5 years. Any city that does that should be ashamed of itself. Do not put Brampton in that situation.
And I would just note, in response to your question, Brampton still collects more taxes from its residents. We charge more than other cities, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to play catch-up. But I note in our budget, we've actually made an historic commitment to infrastructure and transit we have both levies, when that's very unusual. That Mississauga doesn't have that type of commitment to infrastructure and transit, and so I would congratulate council on making that pretty significant commitment in this budget. And this is not a one-year commitment, it's an ongoing commitment to infrastructure and transit. But I think Councillor Vicente wanted to respond to your question as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo the mayor's comments, and perhaps our treasurer can also comment as well. But as we pointed out early on in budget deliberations, we're investing over the next 20 years over $1 billion into infrastructure. That doesn't fully close the infrastructure gap and what we need to spend, but goes a long way in terms of our residents' commitment to continuing to maintain the city in good order. But perhaps the treasurer can comment on just how significant the contribution is that residents have been making, not just this year, but in past years. And this council is committed to continuing to ensure that we have that infrastructure levy continue to be invested in. Mr. Treasurer.
Through the chair. So with the passage of this budget, if everything goes through on Wednesday, you know, council's correct, the mayor's correct, in that we're not reducing our contributions to infrastructure replacement with this budget. In fact, we're also making further investments in our transit service program. That doesn't mean that pressures are not mounting in other areas, but that is something that we are considering. We're working with KPMG on the service review and the value for money audit. We do have to look and assess our programs to determine you know, what services we do want to provide and at what level we want to provide those at. So that's the work that we'll be doing over the coming year to work on that, to help address some of those property tax pressures that we're seeing going forward.
And I would note on that point, Councillor Vicente, and thank you for highlighting that commitment. A lot of municipal infrastructure is contributed to one-third, 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 provincial, federal, and local governments. And I would note that given the historic contribution we're making here, we've certainly come to the table, and it puts us in a position to match those provincial and federal funds. But when you look at the infrastructure deficit, as our staff has highlighted, that's not all a municipal responsibility. If you look at how it is in every other city and how it's been for decades, there are contributions from other levels of government, and by council's foresight in taking this infrastructure and transit levy, we put ourselves in a position to say to senior levels of government, we're ready to do our third when you're ready to do your component too. And so I think it's wise that council put us in a position where we can now match those funds and be ready for the municipal share of the infrastructure deficit. But no one in council or the public should assume that that entire infrastructure deficit will be on the shoulder of property taxpayers, because it's never been that way and it's not going to be. The federal and provincial governments have a role to play in this as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just as to further address Sylvia's question, this council has, from its initial days since the election, been quite proactive in making sure that our federal partners and our provincial partners know and can clearly identify projects that we currently have ready to be funded and in terms of shovel readiness. And the mayor and members of council have been meeting with MPs and meeting with their staff and with federal and the provincial partners to ensure that they are well aware of what the needs of this municipality are. And so it is our responsibility to ensure that we maintain the city in good order. But we need to be continuously working on that, because sometimes it's opportunity. And we have a federal election coming up this fall, and so we identified that as one opportunity to ensure that the current federal government is well aware. In their campaign 4 years ago, they committed, I believe it was $180 billion to build infrastructure across the country. We have yet to see those funds flow. And so we stand ready to give them projects that they can fund. And so it is a priority for us. Okay? Thank you.
So it's true that Mississauga doesn't have a transit levy, but this year alone, they're putting $10 million into the operating budget. Is the city looking at, since like that where it may not be an official levy, but they actually are setting aside real amounts of money? Where this is $10 million coming specifically from the city's portion of the budget. Are you considering things like that when talking about, well, Brampton is the only place that has both an infrastructure levy and a transit levy?
Yes, that's been looked at.
Okay, then how is it that Mississauga doesn't have a transit levy, but they're putting $10 million, even though this is substantially more than the city's increase?
So we can't speak to Mississauga's decision-making, but if there's any questions about today's decisions, we're happy to answer them.
On property tax rates, is the city looking at adjusting the rates? Because I know in other places, the Board of Trade has brought up our commercial tax rates are substantially higher than other municipalities. I think it's 0.5% higher, 0.5 percentage point higher than in Vaughan, and at least 1/4 higher than Mississauga. Has the city looked at changing the rate ratio? Because other cities have. So Mississauga is increasing the residential portion because they've realized because of how much they've put on their commercial base, the commercial base is starting to leave.
Yes, the city has looked at that.
Okay, and where would I find documentation of that?
If
I don't remember seeing that in the budget unless I missed it.
To the city clerk, the budget and city documents are always available to the public and posted on the city website? Okay. Seeing no other, Councilor Vicente, did you want to question?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to the delegation. We do have correspondence from the Brampton Board of Trade that was provided to all members of council and is publicly available. And in addition to the concern that you raised, one of their primary concerns was that as a percentage of income, the burden of the tax rate on Brampton ratepayers is higher than what it is in other municipalities. And this speaks to how the mayor mentioned that we have had a high rate of tax here in the city. The Board of Trade mentioned several times that they feel that it is time for us to look more directly at our spending and to try to find opportunities to reduce and to make the city more efficient. And that's, as the mayor mentioned, we are listening to what the Board of Trade is telling us, and as part of our effort to become more financially responsible, to be more fiscally responsible, we're doing, I believe, taking the steps that we need to take, as the Board of Trade has asked us to do.
Okay, I'll take that as a comment, not as a question. So thank you.
That was, yes, sir.
Thank you, Councilor.
My comment back to the delegation. Thank you.
Okay, I do have a question. Is the city looking at how its tax spending actually affects residents? For example, Canada could scrap Medicare, and then costs would shoot up. Taxes would go down, but if the actual percentage spent as a portion of income would go up, did you actually save the taxpayers money? Or are you just moving money around and making it more expensive? Certain spending, things like transit, this CAA estimates it's about $9,000 to own a car. So if you have someone get rid of a car and switch to transit, they may be paying more in property tax. But if it's one person with that car, they just save $6,000. So does the city consider that spending more money or saving residents money?
I think the logic behind creating a transit levy was the city's commitment to transit. So yes, the city has looked at that during our budget deliberations. Okay, Councilor Vicente, no more questions? Okay. We have a motion. Okay, all those in favor? Motion carries. We will return on Wednesday at 7 o'clock for the purpose of budget. What is lunch? That would determine whether they're coming back downstairs. What? What type of sandwiches?